Hi there. Today, we're once again diving into a true crime case that happened right here in the U.S., one you might have never heard of. This story took place in Springfield, Missouri. It's the case of Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard, with cruelty that goes beyond fiction. Listen closely to understand what really happened. A devoted single mother and her little daughter suffering from a host of serious illnesses: leukemia, muscular dystrophy, asthma, blindness, epilepsy, developmental delay. The media once called them an angel and her wing keeper. Dee Dee cared for her daughter day and night, tirelessly telling the world about her fragile yet resilient child. And Gypsy, always dressed like a princess, wearing a wig and sitting in a wheelchair, just smiled and nodded sweetly. But then, on the morning of June 14th, 2015, a strange post appeared on Dee Dee's personal Facebook. "That bitch is dead." And it was true. Police broke into the house after worried friends called in. Dee Dee was found dead in bed, decomposing, stabbed more than 10 times, with dried blood crusted on pink bed sheets. And Gypsy was gone. The wheelchair was gone. IV tubes, medications, all life-supporting equipment, gone. A girl believed to be unable to walk or survive without meds was missing. Security cameras in Wisconsin, over 1,000 miles away, captured Gypsy walking hand in hand with a strange young man, Nicholas Godejohn, in a convenience store. No wheelchair, no wig, no IV tubes. She walked normally, smiling and talking like a healthy person. And within days, news outlets across the U.S. erupted. What was really happening? What shook the entire community wasn't the death. It was what came after. Because even as Dee Dee Blanchard lay lifeless in her bed, her body decomposing, her Facebook account displayed a chilling status. "That bitch is dead." A dead woman? Posting online? Who wrote it? And why? Welcome to Cold Radio, where we explore the final 30 days of a victim's life before tragedy strikes. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and stay close as we uncover real cases from across the U.S. and the hidden heartbreaks behind them. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Let's continue the story. The post, "That bitch is dead," was made shortly after Dee Dee was murdered. Not by a stranger, but by her own daughter, Gypsy Rose. She posted it from her boyfriend's house in Wisconsin, using her mother's old laptop, with one goal in mind: to get attention. Gypsy hoped someone would read it, call the police, and that her mother's body would be found. It wasn't a boast. It was the only way she knew to bring help. A desperate cry typed in panic. And from that post, the truth began to unravel. People began peeling back the layers of secrecy around the pink house. Neighbors said they had never been allowed inside. Doctors who had reviewed Gypsy's medical records started to reveal something wasn't right. No test results ever confirmed the severe illnesses Dee Dee described. There were no consistent medical files as she constantly switched hospitals, changed doctors, and erased traces. Some healthcare professionals quietly suggested that Dee Dee might suffer from Munchausen by proxy, a psychological disorder in which a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone else to gain sympathy, attention, and control. And then, an even more terrifying truth emerged. Gypsy wasn't a 10-year-old child as everyone believed. She was 23. Dee Dee had forged her birth certificate, lied about her age to keep her forever little. Repressed. She was locked in eternal childhood, never allowed to go to school, have friends, or make decisions. Her world had only two people, herself and her mother. Gypsy once said, "I didn't know what was real. I just knew. Whatever Mom said had to be right." And maybe that's the most chilling sentence in this entire case. Her mother didn't beat her with fists, but with looks, with silence, with threats. If Gypsy disobeyed, Dee Dee withheld food. If she told doctors the truth, she was taken home and punished in silence. If she tried to walk a few steps at home, her mother warned her the world would hate a girl who lied about being sick. Every word, every pill, every glance made Gypsy believe she couldn't survive without her mom. And so, Gypsy grew up like a ghost. She learned to act, learned to smile when given teddy bears instead of a diploma, learned to obey just to live one more peaceful day. But inside, night after night, she wrote diary entries Dee Dee never saw, pages filled with dreams of love, of touch, of walking freely under the night sky like a normal girl. And on an online site, she met Nicholas, a man with mental issues, but the first person who truly listened to her. They texted. They fell in love. They dreamed of a life of freedom. And then, they talked about death. Who really killed Dee Dee? That question seemed answered, but actually it was just the beginning. Because maybe what kills someone little by little isn't a knife. It's the years of being made to believe you don't deserve to live, to understand what happened and why a girl like Gypsy believed blood was the only key to escape a lifelong prison. We have to go back to the final month of Dee Dee Blanchard's life, when everything still looked peaceful, but beneath the light pink paint, a trap had been set long ago. Dee Dee Blanchard was no stranger to charitable organizations in Missouri. She appeared wherever attention could be garnered, from special needs children's support groups to community events, Habitat for Humanity programs, and Make-A-Wish foundations. Always soft-spoken, with sad eyes, neatly tied hair, and a loose lavender blouse, she spoke about her daughter with remarkable devotion. "She's a little warrior, my precious angel," she would say, gently resting her hand on Gypsy's wheelchair as if to affirm an unbreakable mother-daughter bond. People admired her not because she was poor, but because she seemed to possess an extraordinary resilience. A woman abandoned by her husband, raising a sick child on her own, moving from hospital to hospital, from Louisiana to Florida, finally settling in Springfield, a place she claimed to have finally found a loving community. To many, Dee Dee was the ideal mother. She never complained, never asked for anything for herself, and was always by her daughter's side like a shadow. Every doctor noted one thing. She knew Gypsy's medical history in meticulous detail and never left the examination room, not even for a minute. But what lay behind that devotion? It was a locked house, a child who never went to school, exaggerated diagnoses repeated word for word from her mother, without verification. Dee Dee never let anyone speak to Gypsy alone. She'd say, "She doesn't remember clearly. Let me speak for her." And so, year after year, Gypsy's medical records grew into an endless list, even though most test results were vague or normal. Dee Dee was once a nurse, but no one knew exactly where she had worked or why she left the profession. Relatives in Louisiana said she had always had a tendency to lie, about everything from trivial matters to more serious ones. She'd once been suspected of petty theft, forgery, and withdrawing funds from support programs under her mother's name. But none of it was ever fully pursued. She moved constantly, and each move was a chance to start anew. Until she landed in Springfield, where she found exactly what she needed: a compassionate community and a daughter who couldn't fight back. Someone once asked, "Did Dee Dee really love her daughter?" The answer is perhaps more complicated than a simple yes or no. Because clearly, she sacrificed a lot to be by Gypsy's side. She didn't work, never remarried, had no personal life. Every day she woke up to give Gypsy her medication, take her to appointments, attend charity events together. But was that truly love? Or was it possession disguised as devotion? Dee Dee never allowed Gypsy to grow up. To her, a 10-year-old Gypsy was always cuter, more obedient, more pitiable, and more lovable than a teenage girl asking questions about her body, her gender, and her freedom. When Gypsy asked about going to school, Dee Dee said, "You're not strong enough for classes." When Gypsy asked about her period, Dee Dee replied, "You're not old enough. The doctor said so." When Gypsy wanted friends, Dee Dee used excuses like weak immunity and "you need to avoid germs from strangers." Just like that, Dee Dee built a cage of medical justifications, trapping Gypsy inside, with a gentle smile and a cabinet full of prescriptions to back it up. What haunts people most about Dee Dee is not her death, but the quiet existence she imposed on her daughter. An existence full of contradictions, both mother and warden, both caretaker and controller, both an embrace and a locked door. In the eyes of neighbors, she was the perfect mother. But in Gypsy's eyes, she was the one who stole her childhood, her youth, and ultimately, her ability to trust others. Dr. Phil once said, "There's nothing more terrifying than being abused in the name of love." And that is exactly what Dee Dee did. She didn't beat Gypsy with fists. She used sleeping pills, lies, and an embrace that never let go. Every time Gypsy tried to resist, Dee Dee would hold her tight and say, "I do this for you. You don't understand, but I know what's best for you." And that is what makes it all so frightening. Dee Dee believed what she said. She believed the world was too cruel, and she was the only one who could protect Gypsy. She lied, but never saw herself as a liar. In her mind, everything made sense, as long as it kept Gypsy by her side, forever. There were no news reports about that month. No camera captured exactly what happened each day. But if you took a step back, stood outside that pale pink house, and patiently listened to every small movement, you'd sense something was changing. Not loud, not obvious, but changing. 1 month before the night Dee Dee was killed, neighbors began to notice unusual sounds coming from the house. The scraping of a wooden chair across the floor in the middle of the night, drawers opening and closing, whispered voices that couldn't quite be made out from the back room. A woman living across the way recalled seeing Gypsy standing by the window, not in a wheelchair, just standing there, looking out at the street. And that gaze wasn't the look of a child. It was the look of someone waiting to be released. Dee Dee still appeared at gatherings, still smiled, still spoke of her daughter's complicated medical conditions. But at home, she started sleeping less. She seemed more easily agitated over small things. Once, a delivery driver heard Dee Dee shouting from inside, "I didn't tell you to open your mouth!" followed by the sound of something falling and the click of a door locking. It was the first time anyone had heard her voice like that, strong, controlling, angry. At the same time, Gypsy was also changing. She spent more time on her phone, always hiding it beneath her pillow. She carefully deleted her browsing history. She learned to send encrypted messages through anonymous forums, and the person she messaged most was Nicholas Godejohn. They wrote hundreds of messages to each other every night. But what chilled people more were the roles they created in their own private world. Nicholas played the killer, someone with a dark alter ego. And Gypsy, in Nicholas's eyes, was a princess locked in a castle, and only he was cruel enough to free her with blood. In the first week, Gypsy tried wearing her own clothes again, not the princess dresses her mother forced on her. She looked at herself in the mirror, touched her calves, the ones she thought had withered from muscular dystrophy. But her legs were strong. She could walk. She could even run if she had to. In the second week, she stole a kitchen knife and hid it under her mattress. No one knows exactly what prompted her to do it, but Nicholas once said, "We can't be together if the dragon's still alive." It sounded silly, but for someone who had been imprisoned for 20 years, it was a promise of freedom. That same week, Dee Dee started installing extra locks on her bedroom door. She didn't say why, only muttered that Gypsy's been staying up too late. But the truth was likely more complicated. She could feel something coming, and in response, she did what she always had. Tighten control. She banned electronics, gave Gypsy her meds earlier in higher doses, cut off TV, cut off even the right to ask questions. In the third week, Gypsy began acting strangely. She stuffed clothes into trash bags and hid them in an old closet Dee Dee rarely opened. She saved a few pills instead of taking them. Once, while her mother napped, she went to the front door and gently turned the knob, just to see if it was locked. Some say that week, Gypsy sent Nicholas a hand-drawn map of the house, marking the locks, windows, bed, kitchen knives, even the alarm system. No one knows for sure if the map existed. But in his later testimony, Nicholas said, "She taught me how to get in without waking her mom." Then came the final week. Dee Dee canceled appointments. She locked every window, even the back shed, which had always been left open for gardening tools. She began writing a list of what to do in case of emergency. One of Dee Dee's friends, in an interview after the murder, said she received a strange message from Dee Dee that week, which simply read, "If anything happens, tell the doctors I never stopped loving her." That detail was never confirmed, but it spread on Reddit forums, where many following the case believed that Dee Dee knew, and maybe part of her had accepted it. Then the night came. Gypsy put on an old floral dress, opened the back door, and let Nicholas in. She said nothing, just nodded. What happened next doesn't need to be retold, but what most people never know is that before that bloody night, there were dozens of warning signs. Not in the screaming, but in the silence. Not in clear actions, but in the quiet footsteps at night, the disappearing messages, and the turning of a doorknob, just to breathe. Her final month was not a string of sweet days. It was a countdown cloaked in silence. It was the time when every truth began to fracture. No one knew exactly what was going to happen. But if you listened closely, if you stood outside that house and laid your hand on the wall, maybe you would have felt an explosion forming from within. A child controlled for too long. A mother holding on too tightly. And a twisted love, strong enough to kill. When police discovered Dee Dee Blanchard's decomposing body in a locked bedroom, and Gypsy had completely vanished, they didn't immediately call it a murder. Instead, they used a familiar phrase, a high-priority missing persons case. A mother was dead. A frail daughter vanished along with her wheelchair. The house showed no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no ransacked belongings. But there was blood. A lot of blood. The first question wasn't, who killed Dee Dee? It was, where is Gypsy? And then, just hours after the crime scene was secured, the first suspicion emerged, directed at Gypsy herself. A paralyzed child, blind in one eye, epileptic, unable to walk on her own. Disappears without a trace? Leaves behind her wheelchair? Forgets none of her medication? Police began to notice something. Didn't add up. They checked the nearest neighborhood cameras. No strange figures, no suspicious vehicles, no signs of escape. And then, on the phone of a close friend, they found the first clue that shifted everything. Gypsy had a boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn. A name unfamiliar to Springfield, all the way from Wisconsin. The message history between them spanned months. Some of the messages were bizarre. Nicholas referred to himself as the Dark Assassin. Gypsy called him my Black Knight. Police expanded their investigation, tracked IP addresses, and then, like a knife through the curtain, they discovered Gypsy wasn't missing. She was at her boyfriend's house, safe, without a wheelchair, without medication, without needing anyone's help. At this point, the suspicion flipped. No longer a break-in, no longer a kidnapping. The new question was the victim also an accomplice? When Gypsy was arrested, her expression didn't resemble someone who had just been kidnapped. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. She answered in a whisper, "I know my mom is dead." The statement silenced the entire interrogation room, and from there, suspicion swirled around those closest to her. Gypsy became a suspect, but a strange one. Though she was involved, everything about her actions confused investigators. She didn't deny that Nicholas had killed her mother, but she also didn't entirely distance herself from it. She showed no remorse. But she wasn't gleeful either. She sat in silence, occasionally lifting her head to ask, "Will I be tried as an adult?" Meanwhile, Nicholas Godejohn became the next direct suspect. But instead of the cold-blooded killer imagined by the public, Nicholas appeared as a developmentally delayed young man with mild autism, living with his mother, unemployed, obsessed with love and violence. In his testimony, he said, "She told me, if I really loved her, I'd do it." The statement left investigators speechless, because in Nicholas's eyes, it wasn't murder, it was an act of romance. And then the final suspicion fell on the one person no one expected, Dee Dee herself. Police started hearing from neighbors that Dee Dee wasn't as she seemed, that she kept Gypsy locked inside, wouldn't let anyone talk to her, that Gypsy had once tried to run away and came back with a shaved head, too scared to speak, that Dee Dee controlled the finances, the medical records, and that no one but her was allowed to speak to the doctors. A doctor who once treated Gypsy recalled, "We had suspicions for a long time, but when we raised concerns, she immediately changed hospitals." A charity worker said, "We were about to cut off support, but Dee Dee brought in new medical paperwork. It was hard to tell what was real." Then psychologists were brought in. They said, "This could be a case of Munchausen by proxy." And so, in a strange twist during the investigation, roles reversed completely. The victim became the moral suspect, and the suspect became someone who needed saving. No one denied Gypsy's involvement. But who first pushed her to the edge? Who made a girl believe that only blood could lead to freedom? There's one question that kept resurfacing in the years after the case ended. Why didn't she just run away? If Gypsy could walk, if she wasn't truly sick like her mother claimed, if she was lucid enough to fall in love, to text, to plan, why didn't she simply walk out the door and disappear? It seems like a reasonable question, but in reality, it's far too simplistic to understand someone who had been under control for 2 decades. Gypsy Blanchard didn't grow up like a normal child. She wasn't allowed to go to school, had no contact with anyone outside her mother, had no valid ID, no access to money, no permission to use a phone, no friends, and most importantly, no world of her own. Her days were a loop, pretending to be weak, pretending to be naive, pretending not to understand. Every time she did something wrong, her mother punished her by pulling the feeding tube early, cutting off sleeping meds, upping doses of antipsychotics, or more simply, hours of silent treatment. At some point, Gypsy no longer knew what was real. She once said, "When I was little, I thought all moms were like that. I thought if my mom said I was sick, then I must be sick. And if she said I couldn't walk, then I didn't walk." In the mind of a child conditioned like that, freedom isn't real. It's a far-off concept. Every time Gypsy looked out the window, she just thought, "I wish I could play outside like other kids." But that was it. Never any action. It wasn't until she met Nicholas Godejohn that things began to spiral. He wasn't like her mother. He didn't limit her, didn't interrupt her, didn't demand she stay still. Nicholas listened. And more importantly, he believed everything she said. When Gypsy said she was imprisoned, Nicholas didn't question it. When Gypsy said she wanted to die, Nicholas didn't panic. He simply replied, "Then I'll be the one to get you out." The first love of a girl who had lived in isolation. It's nothing like ordinary love. It's intense, distorted, absolute. She had no reference point to distinguish between care and dependence, between empathy and control. And Nicholas, with all his psychological issues, became the only savior she could rely on. Many believe Gypsy masterminded it all, that she planned it, that Nicholas was just a tool. But if you look deeper, you'll see a different kind of dependence, one eerily similar to her relationship with her mother. The only difference, this time, it ended in blood. In court hearings, Gypsy once said something that left the room silent. "I didn't hate my mom. I just wanted her to stop." And that's what chilled everyone. Because in psychology, one of the clearest signs of long-term abuse is not recognizing that you've been abused. You just feel trapped. You don't seek revenge, you only seek an end. And sometimes that end is the most extreme. Some say Gypsy should have run away, but escape isn't instinctive for someone trained to believe the outside world will never accept them. For Gypsy, leaving home without her mother was just as terrifying as staying. And then comes the final question. perhaps the most painful one. Was Gypsy truly a killer? The answer might not lie in the law. Might, but in her eyes during court appearances. Not joyful, not remorseful, not guilty, just a vacant stare, as if she still couldn't quite believe it was all over. The day Gypsy Rose Blanchard was sentenced, there were no tears in the courtroom, no cries, no protests. Everything passed in a strange silence, as if everyone knew that no sentence, harsh or light, could bring back what was lost. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison for second-degree murder. The one who carried out the act, Nicholas Godejohn, received life without parole. On paper, 2 young people paid the price for their actions. The case closed. The media stopped reporting. The slogan "Justice for Gypsy" slowly faded from social media platforms. But what kept this case alive in the public memory wasn't found in the courtroom. It lay in the question, who was the real killer? Nicholas held the knife, but he only came because he was called. He didn't know Dee Dee. He had no personal motive, and if not for Gypsy, he might still be sitting in a small room in Wisconsin, wrapped in his own imagined personas, unknown to the world. Gypsy planned it. But she was also a victim. Not just of prolonged psychological abuse, but of a legal system that never questioned why a girl had to sit in a wheelchair for 20 years without any verifiable medical records. A charity system that trusted a mother's tears more than the faint whispers of a child who was never believed. And Dee Dee, the one who was killed, wasn't entirely innocent as first portrayed. She loved her daughter, no one denied that. But she loved in a way that never allowed her child to grow. That love became a chain wrapped in care, tightened by medication, and ultimately left a mark that could never be erased. From the outside, this was a murder for love. But from the inside, it was the conclusion of a long chain of silence. Dee Dee's death wasn't just the end of a person. It was the collapse of an entire web of lies built on pity, sympathy, and the helplessness of those around her. Years later, in a short interview after her early release, Gypsy looked straight into the camera and said, "If I could choose again, I wouldn't want my mom to die. I just wanted to live a different life, and sadly, the price for that life was blood." It wasn't an excuse, nor a confession. It was a cold statement, just like the story itself. Because in typical murder cases, motives are clear: money, love, hatred. But here, the motive was despair. A despair so deep, a child believed that only death could open the door out of a pink-painted prison. After the sentence, that house was abandoned. The white door grew moss. The pale pink bricks faded with time. And those who once drove past it probably still remember. Not because it was a crime scene, but because it was once believed to be a heaven, until it began to smell of the decay of a fake life. The people of Springfield don't speak of Dee Dee with hatred, nor do they mention Gypsy with pity. They simply withdrew their trust. And perhaps that's the longest-lasting sentence of all. Nicholas remains in prison in Missouri, with no chance of retrial. Gypsy was released in 2023, now lives quietly under a different name, avoiding the media. And the world continues to ask, what might have happened if someone had believed Gypsy earlier? If a doctor had been brave enough, a friend patient enough, someone willing to ask, "Are you okay?" But everything came too late. And when silence lasts long enough, sometimes it isn't broken by a scream, but by a knife. Can someone love another? So much they kill them just to hold on to the feeling of being needed? This is Cold Radio, and stories like this will haunt you long after the video ends. If you're still here, leave a comment, not to debate right or wrong, but to say you're still listening